So today we're talking about my life as an alcoholic, my life in active addiction. And this is, a challenging story to tell if I'm completely honest, because there is a lot of pain, there's a lot of suffering, and there's a lot of shame. Not only the pain that I was in, both physically and emotionally, but also the pain to the people around me that I caused. But I'm going to tell you a little bit about how I became an alcoholic, what happened throughout my active addiction, and then a little bit on how I got sober. And there's a whole other video that goes into that in a whole lot more detail. But in essence, I had two things that are required to become an alcoholic, and that is I was a highly sensitive being and I had complex childhood trauma. Now, as I've pertained to in prior videos, wonderful parents, beautiful humans, many elements of a great childhood, but there were key pieces that were missing in terms of my core emotional needs being met, and some things that happened that were suppressed memories that meant that I grew up feeling that I was unlovable, I was unworthy of love, I was ultimately going to be all alone in the world. I kind of was all alone in the world, and I was too much, and not in a good way. And I know quite a few women have that core belief and limiting core belief about being, too much, too sensitive. That alone is not going to make you a crazy alcoholic. But when you combine all of the pieces, and also with that limiting core belief, you can get triggered quite often as well. So when we talk about the amygdala being responsible for hijacking and causing, it's raining really heavily. Interesting. As I start my journey into the darkness and the suffering and the challenges, the skies open up. So the amygdala registers that alcohol is that one substance that is going to take away emotional pain. And with limiting core beliefs like that are relatively common, it can be quite easy to be triggered. Heartbreak, for example, becomes a whole new level of pain, and also danger for the alcoholic in recovery. So in essence, I lived my life, mum and dad who grew up a long way away from my other relatives, so I didn't have any grandparents, any aunties, any uncles, any cousins nearby. My dad worked a lot, so it was really on my mum, who'd been desperately trying to have children, and had struggled to put a lot of pressure on herself to be the perfect mum. So a lot of anxiety, a lot of unresolved, and again, a whole other video. I feel like I say that too often, but on family systems, because addiction is a family disease. Now, it's not genetic in terms of there's not a specific gene for alcoholism or addiction, but there's a certain setting in which it thrives, and there's a way in terms of epigenetics that the complex trauma moves from generation to generation. And the beautiful thing, one of the many beautiful things about recovery, is you end the cycle of generation trauma. You face your stuff, you get well, and it ends with you. Kids don't suffer, other people around you benefit. So doing the work is, and when I say doing the work, there can be some new kind of modern pseudo-spiritual where it's very, very me, very selfish behavior. No, I'm talking about being selfless and honest and accountable, and doing the 12 steps, going to a therapist, not making everything about you. If in fact, if anything, you're making a lot of apologies, taking a lot of accountability, and showing up as a better version of yourself and being in service. So it's not, the true path in recovery is not a selfish journey, although there is quite a lot of self-observation and introspection that happens early on in the journey. So grow up, on the outside, everything's perfect. Went to a private Catholic girls' school. A lot of shame that comes in with that Catholic guilt as well around, heaven and hell and a punishing God. So, you know, my first ideas of spirituality and understanding a power greater than myself was of this punishing God. And then grew up, when I look back, you know, I didn't realize I was so lonely until I went to a rehab and had to answer the question, when was your first happy memory with your mum? And I couldn't think of anything until I was 19. Nothing. My mum's a rock star. She's a beautiful human, you know, so virtuous, so kind, you know, so caring, so considerate. But I couldn't, you know, like it was that generation also where half a generation on from children are not seen and not heard. And you're allowed to have emotions, but they have to be capped. You can't be too sad. Anger wasn't acceptable in our household at all. No, you weren't allowed to be angry. You could cry, but only a little bit. And every emotion had to be moved through as fast as possible and back to gratitude. So there wasn't a healthy processing of emotions, and it wasn't acceptable to be in your emotions. As a highly sensitive person, that was really hard. So I was shamed, inadvertently shamed for being in my emotions. And much of it was the generational stuff. You know, as a child, when a very early child, I needed self-soothing, and I only found this out later in stories that my mum told me, that she'd read all these books that the child was supposed to cry it out. Now, my beautiful mother was standing on the other side. I was bawling my eyes out as a baby, inconsolable, because we're incapable of self-soothing in those formative years. And she's on the other side of the door crying, hearing her child in pain. It's just how wrong and how much there has been a shift in our understanding of meeting the core emotional needs of children and what they need at certain ages. You know, I really salute conscious parenting, and not the parenting that makes the child feel like they're a little emperor or empress and, you know, they can do no wrong and they get a medal for turning up fourth. No, we need to walk the middle road, because that gives the child the lack of emotional resilience and skills to actually cope with the world. So it's the middle path. But when I grew up, it was, you smack your kids, you know, you yell at them to be quiet, you know, God is punishing, parents are punishing. And I didn't have any of that tribe kind of growing up, you know, for myself and my sister. And the private Catholic girls' school, as I mentioned, and the punishing God. So again, there's no like, woe is me here stuff going on. You know, a lot of great things, a lot of things to be grateful for. Some fundamental systemic trauma, you know, some fundamental flaws in the system, in the way that people parented, and just the cycle of generational trauma that was going. I was the squeaky wheel in the family system. So there was no alcoholism anywhere in my family, no mental health issues anywhere in my family. On the surface, we find out later, sounds like grandmother had really bad depression and anxiety and had a child who passed away and was never grieved. So one thing that I will encourage everyone to do on their journey is some family systems work. There's internal family systems now and the parts of self, but there's also looking at the family tree and what's come down and what epigenetically is still sitting with you. We see this even in animals. Magpies carry on the grudge of the generation before them. Again, nothing woo-woo about this. Everything that I speak to, as much as I will have a spiritual perspective, and I am following Buddhist philosophy, when it comes to addiction and complex trauma, it's all backed by science. If you want me to quote anything, then we can start linking stuff in the comments. So grow up, outwardly, everything's perfect. I travel the world on my own, travel around South America, US. So high performing, and we see this often, the same drive to make people high performers, intelligent, creative, perfect kind of combination for an alcoholic. That's why you see all these actors, Olympic athletes. There is a reason for that. There's genetic pairing that happens. Let's stick with my story for now. So grew up ticking all the boxes externally, not really owning my worth, still some real core values, around lack of self-worth and lack of value